welcome everyone. I'm Jack Llewellyn, and this is Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. Today, we're going to start a three-part examination of the abduction of DEA Special Agent Enrique Camarena from outside the American consulate in Guadalajara on February 7, 1985. Many of you have already heard me talk about my relationship to the Camarena case, but briefly, for those who haven't heard, I started working on the Camarena case in May of 1990 when I was a summer associate and right after my second year of law school. I worked on it when I got back to that firm as a full-fledged attorney and worked on the case through much of the 1990s on appeals and things of that nature. I always note, too, in December of 1992, December 16, 1992, to be specific, the jury had gone out in our case, and Ed Medvine, who was the lead attorney on our case, and my mentor and one of the best attorneys I've ever known, looked at me when we were driving back to the office and said, "Jack, do you realize you've just worked on the most exciting case of your legal career?" And at that point, I'd been a lawyer almost exactly 2 years. So it was a little daunting at the time, but it turns out he was right. And the Camarena case is something that's very personal to me and that I take a lot of pride in having researched and thought about. If you look over my shoulder, you'll see an artist rendering of Agent Camarena. That was given to me by the artist, who's a former DEA agent by the name of Abel Reynoso. He has a gallery in Fort Lauderdale, I believe, and I think you can look his stuff up on the web. A great artist, a really good agent, and a hell of a guy. So that's just another way of pointing out that this case is important to me. And it's really important to me in the sense that I hate what I perceive to be a lot of disinformation. So we're going to attack some of that disinformation. We're going to question some of it. And we're going to start with this three-part review of the abduction of Agent Camarena from outside the consulate. Okay? We're going to start today by looking at those things that we know are true. Things that I can tell you with almost absolute certainty happened and how they happened. What they look like, those sorts of things. So that's number one. Number two, in our second episode, we're going to look at some of the witness statements with respect to the abduction and see what those statements say about the witnesses and about the abduction scenario when looked at in light of these facts that we know to be true. And then in the third episode, we're going to pull it all together and reach some conclusions and make some final analyses. But today, here are a set of facts that we can say are absolutely true. Okay? And we can judge everything else off of these facts. Now, the first thing I want to do is show you a map. We're going to put up a map here that is the basic area around the consulate. And no, this isn't a fancy map. And yes, some other people have put up fancier looking maps and video and stuff, but copyright costs. So here's what we have. And I want you to keep in mind just a couple of really important things. So we want to look at two streets in particular. We want to look at Progreso, which runs north-south, and we want to look at Libertad, which runs west to east as a one-way street. On Progreso, north of Libertad, facing west, is the main entrance to the American consulate. And we have a picture of that. Now, it's not a great picture because security measures have changed. Things are different now than they were in 1985. And by the way, there tend to be a lot of heavily armed police officers around the area of the consulate who really object to people taking pictures of the consulate. And I've had a couple of run-ins. Don't want to have any more. So that's the best picture we're going to get. So you got the American consulate. You can see where that's at. Main entrance off of Progreso. Then if we go southwest, across Progreso, across Libertad, we get to someplace called the Camelot. The Camelot was a restaurant, bar area, and it's really important for two reasons. Number one, the DEA agents often met with confidential informants and other people at the Camelot. Second, if you look at the map, I tried to put a little bit of an area between the Camelot and Libertad Street. That little strip is where DEA agents often parked their cars. It was much more convenient for them to park there and walk to the consulate than to go to the main parking lot for the consulate, which was way up off of Calle Manuel Lopez Catilla. You can see that up at the top. So Camelot's important, and Camelot's not there anymore. We've got a picture of what is there. Okay. And it's now a building housing a company called Alestra. But if you look at this picture, you'll see a red car. You'll see a car in front of it, dark gray. And then there's a blue sign. That right there is basically the area where the cars of the DEA agents would have been parked. And more importantly, more specifically, right about where that blue sign is where Agent Camarena's car, or his truck, was located on that fateful day. Okay? So we've got ourselves oriented, right? Consulate, Camelot. Now, what happens during that day that's important? Now, I'm going to give you a bunch of time, and we're going to put up a timeline so that everybody can see it. Okay? Here's what we know happened that day. Right? About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, agents Kirkendall and Bachelier walk from the American consulate across Libertad, across Progreso, to the Camelot. Okay? They're going to meet a confidential informant and his family. I think he had grandkids there. So they go across the street around 1 o'clock to meet him. A little bit before 1:30, Agent Kirkendall calls over to the consulate and says, "We need some money for the CI." About 1:30, Agent Camarena, by himself, walks from the consulate to the Camelot to deliver this money for the CI. Shortly thereafter, 1:35 more or less, Agents Camarena and Kirkendall walk back across the street, okay, across Libertad, across Progreso, and enter the American consulate through the main entrance on the west side of the consulate facing Progreso. Okay, so that's at 1:35. Agent Bachelier has stayed behind. At about 1:45, Agent Bachelier concludes his meeting with the confidential informant, and he too walks back by himself across Libertad, across Progreso, into the American consulate through the main entrance. About 2:05, sometime right after 2 o'clock, Agent Camarena says to the people in the office around him, "Oh, shoot, I'm late to go meet Mika, his wife, for lunch," and he leaves the American consulate. Sometime shortly thereafter, we're going to say 2:10, give or take a couple of minutes, Agent Camarena is picked up outside of the American consulate. Okay. What do we know for sure about that? Not a lot, and we're going to explain that in this next episode. But what we do know is that the next morning, Agent Camarena's truck was still located in the same spot where he'd parked on the morning of February 7th. But this time, his truck was unlocked and his radio was in it. That's a key fact. The other thing that we know is that in the morning, Agent Kirkendall had parked behind Agent Camarena. So when Agent Camarena left the consulate at 2:05 or so to go meet his wife for lunch, he couldn't have gotten out because Agent Kirkendall was right behind him. Okay. 2:20 or so is when Agent Camarena would have arrived at Lope de Vega. Okay. I have video, which I will put up on the channel when we conclude these 3 episodes, that will show the route from the American consulate to Lope de Vega. In 2022, when I took the video, it took about 8 minutes. So with traffic, everything else, about 8 minutes to go from the consulate to Lope de Vega. So if we say 2:10 more or less for the abduction, by 2:20 or so, he is at Lope de Vega. He's inside. Remember, the pictures of Lope de Vega have that big white wall. Once they move in, or once the car goes in, there's very little that anybody else is going to see. About 2:30, Agent Kirkendall asks for Kiki. Agent Camarena is told that he went to lunch with his wife. And so he leaves with Agent Fidel Sanchez to do some routine work that he was going to take Agent Camarena on. About 2:45, Agents Batchelor and Wallace go back from the consulate to Camelot to meet with another confidential informant. So that's the real short timeline. That takes you from 1 p.m. to, let's say, 2:45. And what do we know from those set of facts? There was a really narrow window in which they could have found Agent Camarena. We're going to talk about that in particular in our next episode. So, we know the geography, right? We know the timeline. We know a couple of other things too. Number one, we know that every agent that was interviewed, that discussed how the agents left the consulate, all say that without exception, they left outside or using the main consulate entrance off of Progreso. Okay? They never used a entrance exit that went to the library or the visa area off of Libertad. Never did that. Keep that in mind next time. So that was a little bit longer than I intended. I wanted to keep this fairly succinct, but those are the facts that we know are true with respect to Agent Camarena's abduction. Next time, we're going to compare those facts to the witness statements and the allegations made well after the fact by some other folks. So that's it for today on Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. Thanks for listening.